In today's video, I interview Annaliese Boucher. She's CEO of a non-profit organisation called Sen Talk, which she started in 2016. The non-profit organisation helps people and families with autism, ADHD, OCD and many other social communication differences. She is also a mum and her son Noah has autism. Today I speak to Annaliese to see what government, schools, employers should be doing in regards to autism, the difficulties that she has found being a parent. We also speak about methods and techniques that she's used also being a parent to somebody with autism, but also what she thinks Noah will be doing in the future. Hi guys, and welcome to another video of the MaxiAspie special series, The Autism Connections. As you can see by the intro, I have a special guest today, so please welcome Annaliese Boucher. So thank you for joining me as well on today's interview. We've got Annaliese here. I suppose, how is kind of coronavirus affecting you at the moment?
Well, it's quite difficult because obviously we're out of structure and routine, which is quite a sort of diagnosis of autism and ADHD, so we're kind of missing those opportunities where we would be sort of regulating and getting ourselves together. So it's all about creating a new normal. So it's been it's been interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's for myself as well. I mean, I'm used to obviously routine and going into the office, and quite strange as well, you know, as you say, it really does change everything really.
I think it can create a lot of anxiety as well. We don't realise that most human beings are creatures of habit. So even if it's those sort of micro behaviours that we do, it does impact us when we're kind of not doing that. One thing that I've really struggled with is kind of finding that purpose. And getting up in the day, although I've got lots of things to do, I'm working from home, so I should be really occupied, but I find it really hard to motivate in my environment and actually finding some sort of purpose. So it can create some sort of down spirals, and there's definitely good days and bad days.
Do you know, what's your kind of connection with autism?
Well, so obviously I'm a parent of an autistic child, but I'm also probably not neurotypical myself, so I certainly inhabit some of my son's behaviours and feelings. So like I was saying about being a creature of comfort, I am definitely one that enjoys routine and structure.
I mean, how's he finding it?
Well, it's funny because when we talk about autism, we often sort of just think about, you know, and I've prime example, I've just done it myself. We think that everybody that's autistic likes this heavy structure and routine, and that's going to cause the most upset. Well, my son's words to me were, when I said, you know, we're going to have to sort of socially isolate, was, I was built for this. And that was it. I mean, he is actually in his absolute element because he is where he feels the safest, and he doesn't have to sort of engage with some of those things that make him really uncomfortable. So I guess it's each to their own.
As you were saying to me about obviously his school and everything else as well, I mean, I presume that's been quite hard for him not going to school now as well. I mean, I know you were looking at other places as well for schools, wasn't you? Because of
we've had a really turbulent time. So Noah was actually taken out of school in January because the school could no longer meet his needs. He's got this lovely presentation where everyone's like, that child, you know, there's, and I hate to say it, inverted commas, looks fine. But actually there are a whole host of things that do make him feel really uneasy and uncomfortable, and it is hard for him to engage in a mainstream environment. So he's been out of routine for a while, so it's almost like he's kind of had that preparation time. I'd say the structure is the main thing, is actually making sure that he has a sense of structure, which is difficult for both of us. But yeah, I mean, that added to already existing issues has definitely sort of heightened it. I'm definitely more concerned about his social and emotional well-being. So we've had quiet days where, you know, he hasn't wanted to talk all day, and you know what, my advice to anyone is that's fine. That's fine. If, you know, he's in a safe environment, the option is there. I'm not going to push it. So he feels that he has to engage in that. And that seems to be quite successful, because at some point he will reach that level where he can share with me. So we have had tears in between, but we've had definitely more good days than bad.
No, I think, as you say, it's really, I mean, I know when I was at school, it was really hard for my mum, you know, to, one, get teachers to understand, and two, even getting them to understand, you know, what to put things in place to support. You know, I think it's terrible, really, that we're in a place where schools just give up and kick people out. You know, I feel it's just not the way it should be. You know, when the going gets tough, it's almost like, nah, you know, bye. And I hate that. I mean, I remember when I went to my last school, the head teacher always used to say, it's not the kids that fail school, it's the schools that fail the kids. I've always thought that was true.
Like you were saying with your mum's experience, is you find a teacher that gets it, or you kind of then end up getting a teacher to get it, and then the year's over and you've got to do it all again, and you're literally just going through, you know, every July, fingers crossed, let's hope we get somebody that's sort of willing to, you know, take an approach. It's really tough. It is really tough. That a lot of the problem is that we have, I mean, I already sort of mentioned it, sometimes if teachers have had experience with autistic children, they will apply those strategies. And just like, you know, every child is different, every autistic person is different as well. So the responses will be different. And I think it's about that individuality. We really need to embrace the fact that everybody is an individual.
No, it's true. It's really true. And, you know, I think you're right. I think, you know, the amount of times I had a different TA at school, and then, you know, you'd move on from one that really understood it, and then you go on to someone that didn't. You know, it was kind of starting over again. And you almost give up, you know, you almost think, you know, even from like my point of view at school, you know, finally finding that TA, you know, who knew me, you know, and then having to move on to someone else, you just think, ugh. I suppose one of my other questions as well was, you know, I suppose tell me about yourself as well, you know, when you were growing up, you know, do you think, I suppose, one, did you ever feel, I suppose, not like anyone else, or did you think that there was not a lot of understanding when you were growing up about it? And obviously then growing up to have a child with autism, you know, how did that all kind of, I suppose, not flow, but how did that all kind of feel, you know, even throughout that time?
I guess, like many parents with autistic children, it's not until your child has that diagnosis, and then you can kind of look back and think, okay, this makes a bit of sense. I never felt like I belonged with any groups. So I had friends at school, but I would kind of float between. And I would say that I was quite a highly emotional person. So I did feel like I didn't, and I was very anxious. I actually was kicked out of school, my secondary school, in year 9. So I had a lot of challenging behaviour. So I was really, really emotional. And then that used to come out with aggression, because, you know, when you're a young person, you know how to regulate or understand those emotions. So I never really figured out how those social relationships worked. Before I got kicked out. And I spoke to her several years ago in an email. We had a really frank email, and she also has an autistic son. And she said to me, if I'd have known what I know now, then you definitely would have had a diagnosis, or you would have got more support. So it was just really interesting. I even went under CAM service as well when I was younger. So in today's society, you know, that would have ticked all the boxes.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting. I've also got a really close relationship with my son, and I almost feel like we are combined, like we understand him. Sometimes we don't need the words to understand actually what's going on there. And I'm incredibly thankful for that. I mean, I'm a single parent as well, so there is a little bit more of a sort of, a pressure. It is just me and him, which is great. And we've created our little bubble of safety, which is nice. But once my son was diagnosed, I kind of found that it was really unfair that there wasn't a lot of support out there for parents. And being an emotionally charged person, I found it really hard to find peer support. So other people that kind of got where I was at and what I was trying to face. I decided that I was going to sort of set up some coffee mornings and try and get other parents involved. And I'd done that, and that was 2015.
Wow.
5 years. Yeah, 5 years later, I now run a non-profit that looks after over 300 families, all with diagnoses of ADHD. Yeah, it's kind of gone by in a bit of a blur. It's been quite rapidly, but it still kind of makes me sad on one respect that the need is so great that I need to exist as an organisation. Yeah. But on the other way, I feel like I'm quite privileged to look at it from different angles, and maybe even my experience when I was younger as well.
I mean, that's amazing. 5 years. I mean, you've got that many, people part of that. And, it's amazing. I mean, I know when I was growing up, as to say, I don't think there was probably a lot of peer support from my mum either. And there's probably the one thing that I think every, parent wants anyway, without their child having a condition as well, is wants that kind of, I suppose, that person to talk to and am I doing the right thing? Am I not?
I think the one thing that really separates us from other sort of like statutory organisations that exist around sort of autism and ADHD is that it really is a gentle environment. So you're coming into a network of other parents that, are going to have bad days, and you probably shouldn't have told your child that probably wasn't their fault. It happens what you do there, or maybe you do need to think that they're not going to get it wrong. Of course you are. I've on occasion, I mean, probably when he was younger, emotional outbursts, trying to manage those, and then I had to take myself away. I know is I am very sensitive to auditory input, so that also could have contributed to that situation. But I've checked myself and I've gone back in, and then I've spoken about it, and a lot of people don't actually speak to their children. And I said, let's draw a line under it. That wasn't okay, because you're modelling, you're saying it's all right to feel bad. We shouldn't feel happy all the time. It's it's about teaching those emotional skills as well, and that comes with life.
I think communication, speaking about it, as you say, I think you're right. Not a lot of people do talk, and that's one thing I've always, had with my mum. We've had that conversation, and I've been able to see it from her side, and she will see it from mine, and then it's just about understanding each other, isn't it, and moving on from that.
Yeah, and I think it also creates that element of respect, from everybody around there. We're a family unit, so you're going to get that's fine, once we've dealt with that and that's been, done and dusted, we move on.
What would you like the world to know about autism? Because I mean, I think the thing that bugs me, with autism, and I suppose the world is, some statistics, it's like 16% of people, with autism that are in full-time work, the people with autism afford more times to be lonely. And sometimes I think people don't really know the true facts and statistics around it. They just kind of go, they're aware of it, but they don't really understand it, So I was just, wondering what's like the kind of one thing that if you could just drill into someone's head, like this is what I want you to know about it, what would that be?
Well, if I was to narrow it down, can I say two things? Because there are two things. Okay. When I start talking. Number one would be, we're moving away from awareness now, and we're moving towards acceptance.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really, really a positive move, because we're not just saying, hey, this is what some autistic people look like. This is what, this and this. We're saying, actually, if you just accept individuals for who they are and understand a little bit more about individuality rather than, just constantly trying to push someone in a little box, it would be a lot easier. Society is not inclusive, and I don't think anybody is going to convince me otherwise. My second thing is about buzzwords. I wish that inclusion, because inclusion for me is a very broad term, and actually what somebody thinks inclusive isn't necessarily inclusive to somebody else. So an example I often give at parent talks that I do is that inclusion isn't about inviting people to the party, making sure people benefit from it. And that's the difference. So in a school setting, for example, making a child who has processing difficulties and really struggles with auditory sort of input, sit in an assembly with 5 children because you're being inclusive is actually doing a lot of damage, and it's really unfair to put somebody through that. Those are my thoughts, and I've got quite strong opinions when it comes to some buzzwords, but I do appreciate the value behind them. Maybe not the execution.
You appreciate the kind of thought process, but maybe it's not the actual best way to include them, because it could actually do more damage to them than not. One of the things I mentioned was, a teacher used to take me out of the room, to read my book. And when I said that at speech, someone said, "Oh, but that's not being, really inclusive. It's excluding you." And I said, "Yeah, but it was more embarrassing for me to sit in the room and do what they call, the read through, and everyone reads a line. And it was more damaging for me to stand up and read my line, and I couldn't read it because I couldn't read. So it's more beneficial for me to go out and learn to read with that one-to-one than being in there."
Well, I think that's where the confusion comes with sort of really loose buzzwords like that, is that actually my interpretation, which probably would be very different to somebody else, is that act of taking you out of the classroom so you could benefit from actually having some literacy input and experience is being inclusive. The problem is we're looking at it from the wrong perspective. They're looking at that from the teacher's perspective or the classroom's perspective, that you're not included in that group of children. Whereas actually, but we shouldn't constantly be measuring individuals based on one, normal neurotypical group.
Yeah. I mean, what made me laugh is one of my old teachers. He asked me once. He said, "So what's inclusion and what's what?" Well, he didn't even say exclude. He just asked me what is inclusion, and I thought it was the total opposite of what it meant. And because of that, it was because schools often call them inclusion rooms, or
absolutely,
and that's taking them away and stuffing them in a room to be in detention, really. So when he asked me that, I said, "Oh, it's when you take someone away." And he went, "Oh no, it's not meant to mean," and that always made me think, oh, what a backwards way of kind of thinking about and naming that room what it is. It's very bizarre.
It really is. There's so many mixed messages. I mean, that doesn't make sense to me either. And I see that a lot of schools adopting this sort of language. So sort of Senkos have changed their names to inclusion managers in some places, or sometimes the other way round. And I get the sentiment behind it. But yeah, again, it's about the execution and creating because that's a segregated space developed for punishment.
Yeah.
basically. So it's not inclusive, is it?
No.
You know.
What made me laugh as well is when I went to my mainstream school, they had an ASD unit and then they had an LSU unit. So they almost, you know, they almost made, I suppose, a bigger deal of the ASD unit, you know, because people would know LSU was learning support unit, but no one would know what learning support that they needed. You know, they wouldn't know if they had dyslexia, they wouldn't know if they had, you know, ADHD. But if you was in the ASD unit, it was automatic. Oh, okay, so he's got autism. And it always kind of boggled me is do you start having a unit for everything? You know, do you start having an epilepsy unit, you know, an ADHD unit? And
Absolutely.
it always made me think, one, is it inclusive or is it counterintuitive? Because people are then going to know what you've got and possibly pick on you for it. And two, where did they feel the need that they needed to?
Where was the line?
Yeah.
I really struggle with this idea, and again, I think it's mainly because I've got slightly rebellious nature, but I just wonder how that would be calculated. It then makes me believe that we have literally just got these boxes for people, but everyone's so different. You know, I've already said this, you know, 3 times we've covered this, but one autistic child is not going to be the same as another autistic child, and there will be different difficulties, there'll be different strengths also. We don't look at strengths enough. So how can you kind of have a whole space just dedicated to a cohort that will probably all be different?
Yeah.
So I just wonder practically, and the way they do it is, it's just kind of, it's that idea, it's the stigma, isn't it, already attached to it, that this will work for this person because they're autistic and this will work. So it's a bank of strategies that we just use instead of sort of moving along and learning a little bit more, because autistic people are not just going to be autistic. The likelihood is they're going to have other conditions also, or maybe even learning difficulties, or, you know, or language needs, or there's a whole host there. So how would you segregate everybody?
That's the thing. Yeah, I mean, it's a mad, really, idea, and I still, to this day, it makes me think, what, you know, why? I mean, I suppose, where do you see Noah in 10 years' time? What do you feel schools could do differently for him?
I think my son will do great things. I think he has a really, really strong mind. I don't think education has worked for him. I think there are just too many confines for him, and actually he's somebody that is going to excel in an area that he really enjoys. If he's anything like me, then he'll take that and do 10 or 15 other things at the same time and really enjoy it. He's a learner. He's always said from really young age that he wants to go to university and that he wants to do something like that, but he's never really managed well in an education environment. He's also quite rebellious, so it may just be the family traits. But I definitely think that he's going to do something special for him, and obviously he's going to have my support throughout. I don't know whether he's even going to get to finish school, or, you know, in the generic sense. It's been decided that he needs to go to a special needs school, but obviously I have to be mindful that that's going to be the right environment. So again, it's about those tick boxes, which often local authorities like to just sort of push towards. Oh, well, that's a school that deals with this, so that will do. Whereas, you know, with 3 children each week, and I can tell you not 2 of them are the same. So he'll do great things. It just might not be in the generic sense, but hey, you know, that's
what was the hardest thing for you being a parent?
Judgment from others, 100%. Even today, you know, I literally tick every box for some social judgment. You know, I'm a single parent, I'm young, I live in a council flat, and I've got an autistic son. So if people see him having a hard time, that's obviously my inadequacies as a parent. And we wouldn't for 1 minute consider there might be something else there. But I am fierce, and I didn't always used to be. I used to get quite upset. I remember getting off buses and walking, you know, like 20 minutes with him in the pram and, you know, crying streams because people were looking at me and making comments or pointing. I mean, I took Noah to Cyprus 2 years ago with my mum, and my mum hadn't been on holiday with us since he was probably about 2 years old, so quite a long time. And she was absolutely just in shock at how many people stare and point. He had a really, really bad sensory meltdown. The flight was delayed. This airport was literally the worst airport we've ever been in. It was so busy. The lighting was awful. People were shoving in front of us. He's got a big thing about social injustice, so no about that. Yeah. And it was just like split second, and he'd lost complete control. And I was at the point where I was becoming quite emotional as well, because I couldn't reach him. Usually I can just reach him before. There was this wonderful, wonderful guy that worked in this airport that saw Noah, literally singled him out, saw him, walked up to us, had a bouncy ball in his pocket and just dropped the ball in front of Noah. And he literally just stopped and focused on the ball, and he's done it again. This guy, he had a badge, he was an autism specialist. Wow. Randomly in this airport in the middle of Cyprus. So I would never have thought that, you know, there would be such a thing. And he took us around the back of the airport because it was at a point where he was so worked up. He just couldn't make himself. He was crying. This is an 8-year-old boy, really, really distressed. And there were grown adults pushing us and tutting and making comments, like swearing, and then, you know, on the streams, you know, that's or I can't protect my son. How dare you? And my mum was trying to do this. He needed to regulate, so he was stimming, and he'd chosen to put a coat over his head, and he was on the floor in the terminal, and he was rocking, and there was a men and women who were probably in their 50s, their teenage daughter pointing at him and laughing, and my mum was just like, how are you doing that? It was just, it was outrageous. But those are the things, it's the judgment that comes from other people that is the hardest.
So people don't understand, do they? And
no.
Until you're a parent, you've got a child with autism. Yeah, I've always said, you know, the person that's going to understand, you know, my autism nearly as much as what I will is my mum, you know, because she lives it, you know, with me day to day. So, you know,
it's really interesting, and I've noticed this in my work as well with families, that mums kind of get this mama bear syndrome, that as soon as their child is diagnosed, they go and do every possible course, they read every single book, they become professionals in occupational therapy or speech and language, and kind of just, you know everything there is to know. And that's exactly what I done. I just wanted to make sure that I could offer him support. So the hardest thing is actually not being able to control what other people think, and watching your child experience that, because he knew they were laughing at him, but at that moment he didn't do anything.
Mums are really most, majority of the time. And,
we try.
No, well,
we do try.
Thank you for speaking with me, and
that's okay. I mean, it's really quite nice for me to reflect and talk about our sort of personal story as well, because often I don't get to share it. It is, I mean, as you know, we've had chats before, my organisation is a labour of love, and I want to avoid having families feel the way that we felt. And we've got so far to come in terms of acceptance. But hopefully with sharing it and listening to autistic adults and stories and stuff like that, we'll kind of get there. So I've got hope. All right, Max, thank you.
No, thank